morning. My name is Christina Kwok. I am the postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Universal Education. I manage the Girls Education portfolio and the Echidna Global Scholars program. And it is my absolute pleasure to kick us off on our first panel on empowerment approaches to skills development for adolescent girls. So to keep it brief, you all have the bios of all the panelists and all the speakers in your program agenda, so I won't go into any details, but I wanted to first introduce our first Echidna scholar, Ganga Gautam from Nepal, who will be speaking to us about his research on his pilot program in rural Nepal, training adolescent girls in leadership and empowerment. Then after Ganga's brief presentation, we will have a moderated panel, moderated by Rebecca Winthrop, who you all have already heard from before this morning. And then we'll also have Tassina Ahmed, who is the director of the skill development sector at BRAC, Heather Simpson, who is the chief program officer at Room to Read, and then also Judith Ann Walker, who is the managing director and founder of Development Research and Project Center in Nigeria. And she is also a non-resident fellow of the Center for Universal Education and was a former Echidna scholar herself as well. So without further ado, I turn it over to Ganga. Please welcome him.
Thank you, Christina. It's great to be here, and I feel very honored and privileged to share with you the research that I just completed here at Center for Universal Education at Brookings on empowering adolescent girls in rural Nepal. And this research is based on my pilot study, which I began 2 years ago with the generous support of the US Embassy in Kathmandu. So happy to see all of you, including the embassy officials who work in Nepal. And also thank you all the American taxpayers for helping me with that project. So, just to give you a brief background of my project. So girls' access to education in Nepal is very widespread, and the enrollment figures have increased. But completion and retention, they are very big issues. Most of the girls, they drop out from 8th to 10th grade. We don't have exact data for that, but those who reach grade 10, only 20% of them graduate. Very serious situation. So why is this happening? We have governments, we have NGOs, and they are providing scholarship support for all adolescent girls to address the economic barriers. But there are a lot of wider set of barriers which equally affect the girls in their study. So talking about them, menstruation, that's one of the key issues in Nepal, which keeps the girls away from school every month, and in the worst cases, they are isolated in a hut like this from the family. And in schools, they don't have sanitary pads and no clean toilets for during menstruation. And early marriage, it can happen as early as 12 years or mostly between 13 and 14. And parents give girls more household chores than the boys. Similarly, parents don't value education for their girls because they think that they will go to their husband's house and they won't get any direct return. And similarly, teachers are not sensitive to the girls' issues, and then boys harass them in school. And also, teachers are not aware of the gender-sensitive, gender-responsive pedagogy in school. So in order to support the high school girls who enter grade 8, I and my team, we launched a pilot project for 75 girls from 15 different schools in Nepal. And during that program, we tried to focus on demystifying the adolescent changes and menstruation. And we tried to provide the girls the skills and strategies to manage time for chores and their study. And also, we engage them in some problem solving and leadership skills. And I have given the details in the report. In addition to that, we also invited parents, teachers, community leaders, male and female, the political activists in the community, social leaders, and we had a kind of engaged discussion in which we suggested the teachers to be sensitive to girls in school, make sure that boys don't harass them, and also respect the girls as not only favoring the boys. And similarly, we also suggested the parents how they can support their girls in their study and during the examination. And the program facilitators included, of course, many members, doctors, nurses, gender expert, educationists, both male and female. So, and one of them is here, the trainer. And also we had the officials from the American Embassy in Kathmandu who worked with us during the training, during the program. So, what happened? After 1 year of the pilot, I went back to the girls and interviewed 32 of them, their parents and their teachers. And this is what I have found. All the girls, they are in school so far, and then 40% they are educating other boys and girls in their school and in other schools. And according to teachers, their test scores have increased. I was not able to get the final exam data because that was not happening at that time. And 50% said that they are communicating better with their parents and teachers. And the girls themselves stopped 3 early marriage cases by going to the parents, talking to them, making them aware of the legal provisions made against early marriage. And some girls, they have also joined lots of advocacy activities to stop early marriage, trafficking, and protect the environment. And also in some schools, the girls have improved school sanitation by buying buckets, filling them water from the nearby sources, and bringing them to school toilets. So, despite the progress that I have observed, we also talked about what are the areas that we need to address more in the future. So, menstruation and the taboos, they are rooted to their religious and cultural beliefs. Though there are some improvement, we need more work in this, a very careful approach to address the taboos. And still parents give more chores to the girls, so we need more engaged discussion with the parents in that area. And our pilot program was just one shot, there was no follow-up, but we need more follow-up support for the girls to educate other girls, either through community mentors or school mentors. And also we need, President Bandra already said, we need boys into the discussion and men so that we have gender-sensitive environment in the school system. And number 5, the girls, they have also asked English language and ICT proficiency, without which they think that they're incomplete. So this is something that we need to find ways of integrating in the future. So based on the pilot and the literature that I reviewed here at Brookings, I feel that in the rural context, the Girls Empowerment Program, it's a continuous process, travels in the continuum, but the initial program should encompass at least 4 components: skills, awareness, language and ICT, and parental and community engagement. So what next? So my plan, when I go back, is I'm on the curriculum revision board at my university, and also the Ministry of Education invites me for training their curriculum and textbook writers. So I plan to integrate the gender-sensitive components and also the adolescent growth and study skills into the curriculum, because we are revising that in the new political structure. And also, I am so excited, and my team is excited to bring the programs to the other rural areas. And obviously, there are lots of people here from different organizations. We will also collaborate with like-minded organizations in research and programs for girls' education in Nepal. Thank you very much. Now, may I invite the moderator and the fellow panelists to the stage.
Yeah, are we good? Yes? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kanga, for your presentation. What we wanted to talk about today in this panel is this idea of empowerment.
Right.
And it's really a very, very, I think, hot topic and interesting topic about the relationship between how much can you advance girls' standing through training and skills development, and we're talking a lot throughout this whole day about life skills. How far can they go without necessarily changing the sort of sociocultural environment in which they are, the structural dimensions? I think that's a really hot debate. It's a good debate. Clearly, you probably, I suppose, need both, but it is a question in my mind about what are the limits of each. And I'd love to hear, just to kick off with you, Ganga, you presented something really powerful, which is all the work you're doing in Nepal.
Thank you.
And you honed in your program design, in your project, on sort of a few specific skills and capabilities for the girls that you thought were important for them to develop. How did you pick what those skills and capabilities were?
Right. In addition to the study skills, thank you for the questions. I think that's very important. We also wanted the girls to take leadership and practice the kind of skills right from the school level, which wasn't that easy in the rural context because the girls are told not to be talkative right from the foundation level. They're avoided in the discussion when there is a family discussion or community discussions and those things. So what we really wanted was to engage them in a very small scale project at the school level and community level so that they develop confidence in developing those skills. So we encourage the girls during the training to group themselves in smaller groups and talk about the key issues, challenges, and the barriers that they have observed in the school and community setting. And think of the strategies that they could implement on their own without much support from their parents and the school. So the example that I gave, the bucket thing, is one of them. And at the end of the training, all these girls, they identify 3 to 5 problems which they could solve by themselves and by forming several strategies among them. So by engaging them in those projects at school and community, we thought they would develop all these kind of key life skills that they need in the future, which will contribute to develop leadership skills for the future leadership. So that's what we did.
That's how you chose it. Interesting. Yeah. Judith Ann, why don't we turn to you? You've been doing a lot of work across West Africa, but in particular Nigeria, in particular northern Nigeria, where the topic of girls' education is very contentious in terms of what's happening politically. Can you tell us a little bit just on this topic of empowerment, girls' empowerment? What are sort of the challenges and the balancing acts you've had to do when working with communities on issues of rights and girls' rights and women's rights? How have you navigated that?
It's a problem, but it's not so much of a problem in the sense that whether we believe it or not, the government, they get it, and they're on message for empowerment. Empowerment is a big conversation, curricula are being reformed, and everybody's speaking the language of empowerment now. Girls must go to school, they must be empowered, and that's there, it's out there. And I recognize that, and it's a leveraging point. But what I often find is that when I assume that what I hear is a truism, when you actually engage and you begin to talk about, so how do you teach them and what do you expect after they're taught in the classroom, then you realize empowerment is just a word. Empowerment, though the government officials think they get it, the teachers think they get it, it's not the essence of empowerment, is void and lost. And that's because I think a lot of us haven't spent enough time unpackaging what do we mean by empowerment, because it's a buzz term. And for us, what we do in our organization is that we train civil servants. Very often when proposals are written and when interventions are designed, it's about the girls and it's about doing good for them. And that's a good thing. But we often neglect the stakeholders, the policymakers who have a vested interest in maintaining the system the way it is. I remember when we made a grant application to the MacArthur Foundation, and the largest chunk of the funding was for civil service training. We were queried on it. This is a girls' education project, we are told. Why are you training civil servants? We said to them, if you don't start with them to do a gender sensitization workshop, to get them to understand that what empowerment really means, and to look at a curriculum and say, how does it work for boys? How does it work for girls? Because they don't get that. At best, they think they're gender neutral. They're not against girls. That's one situation. But how do you move from that to being for girls? Because the education system can be against girls, and they're really happy, and they knock themselves on the chest. We're not against girls. Yes, but you need to be for girls. How do you get that? And that's the challenge that we engage almost every day. And that's why whenever we design a project and begin an intervention, we engage civil servants, we engage policymakers, we engage them not, advocacy, no. It's not just a face-to-face contact. We say to them, let's stay in a room, let's do 1 week of training on what's gender programming, what's gender analysis, what is gender audit, gender-based budgeting. They're tools, let's work with them. And we get, at the end of it, people say, these things are really useful. And it makes a change, and we've been able to determine that. So it's hard, and it's also based on what we all accept, and we all think that things are working well, but they are not. Yeah.
Thank you, Judith Ann. Heather, let's turn to you, because Judith Ann talked a lot about working directly with government officials. You've done some sort of surveying of government policies in areas where Room to Read works, and have shifted a lot of your emphasis in your girls' education work on life skills. Can you tell us about what you've done, why you've shifted it, what you found, and what you guys are doing at Room to Read?
Sure, thank you. And thanks again for this opportunity. So Room to Read's been working in girls' education for about 15 years, and we started as a scholarship program. And then pretty quickly started doing a lot of different things: academic skills training, teacher training, life skills training, mentoring, still academic support, things, a whole range of things. We realized that the size of organization we needed to be more focused. We needed to be more specific on what our role could be. And we did. We looked both at what was working from our country office colleagues and what they highlighted as what made the biggest difference. Life skills was what they tagged. And then we looked at what policies existed, what ministries of education were focusing on. And there were structures in place for teacher training. There were structures in place for curriculum design on academic skills. But in very few places was there a really focused, articulated approach for life skills support for girls. And we had that expertise. We knew that we had something to offer to the system as well as these girls in these communities. So we chose to focus on life skills training specifically for girls, because we saw girls entering lower secondary and upper secondary school had very different opportunities to develop their life skills as compared to their boy counterparts in their classrooms. And so Room to Read now is focusing on developing those opportunities for girls to develop their life skills, and really focused on foundational learning skills that serve them to succeed in school, as well as will serve them outside of school beyond. But things like critical thinking, persistence, problem solving, communication, there's evidence base that this makes a big difference in people's development and in academic achievement. And that's why we're focusing on those skills for girls. Now we're trying to deepen the evidence base on this for international evidence base, so we can have a more powerful dialogue with decision makers, with policy writers, with donors, with ministries of finance to actually invest in this once we have that evidence base, because it's pretty thin right now. And with support of some of the donors such as Echidna Giving and U.S. Department of Labor, the Gates Foundation, we are able to start to build that evidence base around on life skills and girls and the change that it really makes. But there's still a lot of work to do in terms of having those policy dialogues.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Heather. Christina, let's come to you and your work at BRAC. You have done a lot of work building networks with the private sector in terms of thinking about the structural barriers to young women and women in the labor market. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and how you think of changing some of those structural barriers?
Basically, for BRAC, the issue of girls' empowerment has always been high in the agenda, and it tackles poverty in a multidimensional aspect. So providing education where it's needed, providing healthcare where it's needed, and so on. One of the missing links was actually to recognize the fact that even though the government has done a lot and is doing a lot, and there has been tremendous gain in education, the dropout in secondary school, similar to Nepal, is actually very acute. And majority of the dropouts are actually girls. So where do these girls go? They are absorbed in the informal market, and majority of them are actually engaged in hazardous work. So one of the aim was that how do we actually reach out to these young girls who have actually given up on school? They don't have a choice. Even if there's a free BRAC school in the community, they can't afford to go to that school because they have to earn money for the family. So the solution on our side was actually to provide technical vocational training to these young girls, and basically to try to get them out of hazardous work and provide them options in life where they can actually get into more decent work. What we do is basically we work very closely with the private sector, recognizing that it's not actually enough to get community buy-in, which is extremely important because similar to Nepal, girls are restricted with all the socio-cultural barriers and taboos. The issue of mobility, the issue of coming out of the house, the issue of interacting with men, all of these are very big issues, especially in the remote rural areas. So how do you actually go beyond this? So first step is actually convincing the parents, convincing the guardians, but also convincing community member. But then also recognizing that, okay, with these skills, we will be putting these girls into a male-dominated marketplace, which in Bangladesh is very much a reality, just as many of the South Asian countries. So it's also an issue of making the market sensitized to have young girls in the market, so having market buy-in. So in order to have that, it's very important to actually work very closely with the private sector from the very beginning. We work with small, micro, and medium-sized enterprises because that's where the informal economy actually revolves around. And we orient these, they become like our partners in the work that we are doing, orienting them on basically two issues. One is introducing them to the concept of decent work, as ILO is actually promoting, very strong in Bangladesh. But what is decent work? And how can we actually support these small businesses to change their workplace into a more conducive, safe work environment for those girls to actually work in? So this in one hand, so we work very closely with the small entrepreneurs, we work with market associations, we work with local chambers, and this is a very, I would say, intensive groundwork we need to do before even we launch the program, so that to get the marketplace ready to receive the learners. On the other hand, we recognize that one of the, I would say, key modality of our training is apprenticeship-based training. So we actually build on the traditional apprenticeship system, which exists in many of the South Asian countries. But what we do is that though, shop owners have actually, they have helpers in their shops, they have assistants in their shop, they have actually never followed a curriculum. So actually training the shop owners to use a national curriculum. How do you follow a competency-based logbook? How do you actually maintain the standards of teaching or learning using, these logbooks, but at the same time, teaching the girls how to, I would say, for example, repair a cell phone in the shop. So they are actually placed in the shops and they learn, I would say, hands-on training, but following a curriculum. And what the program that we have launched actually has packaged this technical vocational training together with a component of soft skills, which we have found from our experience is extremely important. It actually reinforces the work or I would say the competencies that the girls gain through the training. Soft skills which actually include different types of, I would say, skills in terms of communication, negotiation, customer relationship, and so on, but together with financial literacy. But there's also another component on learning their rights. And this is also something which was very strongly, I would say, flagged with our morning speakers. But basically, learning that there are laws against child marriage, there are laws against dowry. When we speak about young girls who have dropped out of school, very similar to Ganga's case, that the risks of getting married off is, I would say, very acute because it solves a problem in the family. It's one mouth less to feed. No? So this risk is very acute. There's the risk of getting into hazardous work. There's the risk of getting into prostitution. So what are the laws actually against these risks? So this is very important that the girl actually knows these laws. At the same time, we ensure that the girl, because once she's trained, she will become an employee soon. So what are employee rights? This is actually as important as knowing human rights. Huh? So what are rights when it comes to minimum wage? What are rights when it comes to having a proper contract with your employer? Where in the informal sector, this is actually not really, I would say, adhered to. So these are, I would say, elements in the program which actually reinforces the technical vocational training that we impart. Another thing that we have found from our experience is the issue of language, the barrier of language. Many of the technical training that we provide use actually terminologies which are in English because many of the English terms have been absorbed by our languages. For example, if I'm a cell phone repair mechanic, somebody will probably come to me and say that my circuit doesn't work or my display doesn't work. So we use display and circuit synonymously in Bangla. But a young girl will never, or young boy would never know what a display means. So we've actually identified all these terminologies which are used in the technical training that we're providing. And we've worked together with the BRAC Language Institute to develop these trade-specific language modules, which again reinforces the training, the technical training that we provide. So I would say it's a quite a holistic approach to look at the providing quality technical vocational education in line with national standards, but packaging it together with soft skills and entrepreneurship skills and then language skills, which definitely makes a difference.
Great, thanks. I wanted to pick up on your interesting point about, there's community buy-in, but for your program, it's even more than that. It's also marketplace employer buy-in, employer-employee buy-in. But the topic of community buy-in, I think is really important. I think we should talk about it. And Ganga, maybe coming back to you, can you tell us a little bit about, what did you learn about communities' attitudes towards girls' education when you started? What would you suggest other programs take into account? Are there things you would do differently now in terms of getting community buy-in?
Right. And that was one of the toughest part in our program also because community comes with very loaded assumption. So we basically wanted them to question those traditional assumptions. So what we did was we invited not just the parents and teachers, but the local women activists, male who are in support of girls' education and empowerment, local health personnel. Mostly they were male, and the girls would never go to them because they were too shy to go and talk to the male doctor. And also we had American women working at the US Embassy talking about their experience in the US. so that the parents and girls think that this is a kind of universal biological issues, not specific to Nepal. So we try to build up a kind of alliance among all these sectors and talking to the parents how they can support. It's not just talking Ganga about how parents can support the girls, but the local doctors talking about the nutritious food required for the girls when she's in this menstruation period. The consequences of isolating her in the community. The nurse talks about those things. So by building that such a big alliance, we thought that the parents would question their assumption and rethink the kind of practices, malpractices going on in the community. So even if they cannot change, if they question their assumption, I think that's one step further. That worked a lot. When I went back to the girls and talked to them, some of the girls, they came to me and said that, sir, I don't have a mom. I have father only because my mom died. And then when I have menstruation now, my father buys me sanitary pads, which he wouldn't do earlier. Mm-hmm. There are lots of stories and great quotes from these girls. So having that bigger alliance from the local community plus outsiders, having an American woman was also a very added value into that program because they could see the role models, not just from local areas, but also from elsewhere, leading different programs at the US Embassy. And they also shared their struggling life when they were small. So the lessons that we learn about community engagement is the more alliance, the stronger alliance you can build among the players in the community, whoever available, then the better it can become. Yeah. That's my learning.
That's your advice. Great, thanks. Judith, then back to you. Tell us a little bit about how you get community buy-in, how you work with folks. We've talked in the past about your reaching out to men, even members of Boko Haram, and having conversations, which seems gutsy. Yeah.
Well, we don't have American women, as you do in Nepal, who are part of the community that can be volunteers and models.
I was fortunate.
Well, yes, you are. If one were to look at the internet and to look at the stories on Nigeria, northern Nigeria in particular, there's an impression that the community is very conservative and very resistant to any type of change in the education system, particularly technical and vocational changes that we have now, because the entire curriculum is being changed for the secondary school level, and it's more technical, vocational, and craft-oriented. And one gets the impression that there would be a pushback or would not be accepted. But that's not really so. The community, I keep saying this, they want the best for their girls within the confines of how they understand best. They are supportive. They are not entirely and innately resistant, but the relevance of education is one that they question. If the so-called technical and vocational education that is now being rolled out in the reforms do not lead to their daughters getting jobs after, so you have the labor market issue. You have a huge informal sector that's not linked to skills building. And you have an education system that reforms the curriculum and does not link it to the labor market. You have silos and pillars, everyone trying to do their best, but it's not joined up. And then the community is there looking on and very confused, but at the same time wanting the best for their daughters. What we try to do is to bridge the gap. Non-governmental organizations can do a lot of great work, but you need government to take things to scale. Initiatives must be driven by government. So as much as possible, we go back to the point of working with government, working with policymakers, working with the silo of labor and the silo of education and the silo of the tech people, because in the ministries, they're all like that. And getting them to sit together and talk together and to talk about what next for these girls. Because if we don't crack that nut, the parents at some point are going to say it doesn't make sense to let them go to these technical and vocational programs, because at the end of it, they end up staying home like all the other girls who are not going to school. And maybe the girl who goes out and hawks with a tray on her head is more valued than the one that I've invested my money. She's gone to this craft school, comes out, and she can't do anything because there's no linkage in the labor market. And the problem is there's a lot of good intention, but how to get them talking to each other, joining up the good intentions, and moving as one whole with a one understanding of how education articulates with labor, articulates with the market, articulates with the needs of human beings to survive. And that's the crux of the matter. And that's what we try to get at, but that's a difficult one. That's what so many actors are working on in the education space in Nigeria. But that's the big push. That's the hard one because the silos just continue. And the community is moving to the point now where they were very energized when they were told that we are reforming the curriculum, it's more crafts-based, it's more skills-based. Then they look back and they say, but really there's no change. And that's a dangerous thing because we've moved from a conventional, conservative English, math, and literature curriculum to a new skills-based curriculum and still no change and still no end in sight as to how girls can live valued and rewarding lives, leveraging this new knowledge and new skills that they've gained. And if we get to that point and the parents just drop off, I think it's going to be worse than many other things that we've encountered in the environment.
I'm curious your experience, Cecina, on this topic of, BRAC has worked a lot on just talking about what you were the program you were describing just a minute ago about getting women, young girls, not young girls, but young women into technical vocational training on site into the labor market. And you certainly have a number of stories of facing resistance, the type that Judith Ann is worried might come down the line, resistance from male guardians who are worried about a range of things. What are they worried about, and how have you overcome that resistance?
I think that the two main issues that parents worry about, first is the whole issue of security of a girl, going into the market. And the second is that, yes, whether it's worthwhile, similar,
point, right.
that will his or her daughter at the end actually get a job.
Right.
So is it actually worth, investing the time and the effort? So these two are basically the most critical area. There, I think that, the community engagement is definitely critical. Because you have to have the support from the community, the support from parents, and I would say create a motivation to an extent that, yes, parents are actually willing to take that risk, to say that, okay, let's give it a try. But in order to do that, we also have to have, I would say, training modules which do succeed, and we're able to actually show that, yes, this taking, I would say, a girl away 6 months from what she was doing before has actually been worthwhile. So what we did was that actually we started very small as a pilot, and as I explained earlier, that it's an apprenticeship-based program where, in very close partnership with the private sector, where the private sector is actually investing, providing the infrastructure, providing the equipment, providing the technical support, but also helping with doing demand-based surveys that are, okay, in the community, what are actually high demands in terms of occupation? What's the training that we should actually provide as BRAC? So again, coming back to the relevance, of training. So being able to identify those high-demand occupations, and then again, helping, I would say, in maintaining the quality. So the private sector, at least in our program, plays a very critical role. What we see that in our program, it's 6 months apprenticeship-based training where young boys and girls are actually placed in the shops for 5 days a week doing on-the-job training. And 1 day it's actually theoretical training on the elements that I earlier said, on soft skills and so on. We've seen that because these occupations are actually identified through demand surveys, and because the learners are actually learning in the workplace, they get a job within 1 month of graduation. So this has been kind of our record since we've started our program. We've had evaluations which have actually looked back to our first batch of graduates as we call them. And we've seen that 98.2% are still employed. So, which is very impressive, I would say. If you compare to the other efforts that have been made in, I would say, the informal economy, which is very challenging. So this itself, when this small pilot showed these good results, automatically it was also an issue of credibility, of gaining trust, as a model, as a program. And slowly, our program has actually grown. It's now all over Bangladesh. Till date, we have 12,000 graduates. All of them, 99% are employed. 50% are girls. 10% are actually learners with disabilities. It's extremely, I would say, and we have, I think that, every learner has a story to tell. For each of them, it's just a life-changing opportunity. I think that it's so gratifying just to be able to be part of that change process.
Great. Heather, last question to you before I turn it over to all of you for questions that I'm sure you have for these great panelists. Tell us a little bit about what Room to Read is doing around assessment of life skills. And how, I know you guys are doing a lot of work on that. And then a second part of the question is, how are you trying to engage parents in that? Is it just raising their awareness about how to assess, or is it other pieces to that puzzle?
Yeah, I'll start with the second piece, and then I'll do the life skills assessment more detailed. So we were looking at some of our data to try to figure out what the risk factors were for girls dropping out of school. And we saw there were 4 things. So if girls didn't attend our life skills training programs, if they were not coming, if they were failing academically in school, if they were, actually 3 main things, and if their parents weren't coming to our facilitated conversations. So one of the big pieces of our work is facilitating conversations with schools and community members around girls' education. And we have different topics that we talk about. But we saw that if a parent were not showing up to those meetings, there was a higher correlation to girls dropping out of school. So part of our program also has mentors who are local girls who we hire as Room to Read staff, but they're known by the community, they are trusted by the community, and they're mentors, and we call them social mobilizers. And they go to communities, they go to the parents, to the homes, as well as the schools to talk about this risk factor that we're seeing as we're tracking the girls and how they're engaging with our communities. And we find that that's a very important intervention at the point it's needed. So that's one way that we engage with parents and communities. In terms of life skills assessment, so again, we believe that improving these life skills makes a big difference. When the First Lady of the United States visited our girls in Cambodia, these were girls who, at the beginning, when Room to Read started working with them, would not speak up in class. They were very timid, they were very shy. And several years later, they were standing in front of the First Lady of the United States, being very just well-spoken. They have dreams, they have hopes, and they're able to communicate them. Made a big impact on her, on all of us. So we know that there were changes, but there were not very many tools to help us figure out what interventions were leading to the positive changes we wanted to see. How can we measure life skills learning? In the same way, we're also measuring literacy learning, and there's a whole lot of tools and assessments that are well designed and well proven in the literacy space. We're trying to create those similar types of tools in the life skills learning space as well, because we really have seen the power of data on literacy, on primary school education. We need to see that same power of data in the life skills learning. So right now we're working with a lot of partners, JPAL and Williams College, Dartmouth College, different thought leaders in measuring life skills to come up with tools that we can apply in developing country settings that's easy enough, quick enough to get data that we can then use. And right now we're still in the development process, but my vision is that Room to Read will be able to use these data and talk to parents and talk to community members, talk to schools, talk to ministries, talk to donors, to talk about the change, the positive effects we see on life skills learning as we're seeing that, as it correlates with school graduation rates, with employment rates, and other things that we think are positive effects of girls learning. But it's still, we're deep in the development of this. We are hoping that we will have tools that will be able to share, that we'll be able to talk about, and I'm really excited about it, but it's a real gap right now that we're trying to address.
Great, thanks so much. Well, with that, let's open it up to questions and thoughts for the panelists from all of you. Have a little cluster over here. Please be sure to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Valerie Haugen. I'm an independent contractor. Thank you, panel. That was very interesting. I just wanted to raise a few things in relation to some of the things that the panel members have said. Maybe Heather, are you looking at trauma-informed pedagogy in your life skills work? That's a question. Another question is, with respect to empowerment, I think we really need to have a do no harm lens on some of these empowerment activities that we do with girls, because we actually can create harm in our endeavors to empower girls, and I think that there's a fair amount of maybe gray literature on that. Maybe it hasn't bubbled to the surface. And I think one thing that anybody who's working within both the formal and non-formal education spaces could really push for collectively is that any kind of curriculum reform is underpinned by a gender anti-bias analysis. UNESCO has a great tool, and they actually did gender anti-bias analyses of 4 different the textbooks, I should say, of 4 different African countries. And just seeing those data graphically represented is really powerful. You see the way in which from grade 1 onwards, gender bias is present within the curriculum, and just it's something that we could address, I think, quite easily if we actually unified behind that. Thank you.
Can you say just a little bit more on the second point of the do no harm lens on empowerment? Are you talking about the risks of backlash from community members, boys, or what are you talking about?
Yeah, I think it's all kinds of dimensions to that. I'll give an example from Tanzania, where I was doing some research on a girls' education initiative that had a really strong empowerment principle underpinning it, and a story of one girl who spoke up to her father, which she would never have done before participating in this education program, donor-funded education program, and he beat her up for talking back to him. So I think we have to be factor that possibility into our programming.
Right, sure, sort of the problems that come with
exactly. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll get them all and take notes and rapidly. So if you could be a little bit brief, that would be great.
I'm Mayad Abu Jaber from Jordan. Thank you for the panelists. I was quite interested in the demand-driven employment program that you talked about. It was interesting in Jordan. We worked for 10 years on these demand-driven training programs, and we realized when it came to girls and the linkage to jobs, we worked a lot with the private sector. So we always feel that that's where the problem is. And then we created all this training program with technical and soft skills to realize that only 40% of the women actually accepted the jobs. And when we went into a deep root problem, it wasn't really the problem of technical skills or soft skills or the English it was really about community. It was really about the family. It was really about the culture, all this soft, the belief system, everything that sometimes we overlook when we do these demand-driven employment programs, especially in the vocational sector. So I was wondering, we made the package even bigger, which made it very intensive for donors because the cost per person became really huge. So I was just wondering what kind of, your numbers are really high, like 90% employment, and we had the contracts ready and women were not, accepting a job because of pressures. So what kind of other interventions like community mobilizing or, I don't know, identifying leaders or role modeling did you do to actually overcome such things?
Great. Thank you, Mayada. There's one here. Yes, and if you could stand when you ask questions, that would be wonderful so we can see you.
Great. Hi, I'm Ashley Grimes. I'm from IREX, and I have a question for any of the panelists. How are you using technology and administering your skills development and problem-based learning in your curriculum? And I would love if you could share one or two best practices from your experience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Urvashi here.
Hello, first I'm Urvashi Sani from India, and first of all, congratulations to all the panelists. Congratulations, Ganga. My question is, I want to comment firstly on what you said from BRAC about the educating girls for about their rights and even in the employment about their rights in the workplace as well. And do you also educate the community when you include them about girls' rights? Because we found that despite engagement in the employment force, many of our teachers, in fact, in middle-class schools, they work full-time at schools, bring home the money, which buys the bread, and yet they have all the burden of the household chores. And it leaves them almost as unequal as they were before and face domestic violence and all of those. So how do you address that? And to you, Ganga, again, that in your program, do you have a girls' rights approach? And are you also looking, you've mentioned in your paper about patriarchal mindsets. So is the whole goal also to change the patriarchal mindsets? And in terms of the harm lens, just quickly, and that's my last point, that we, just to respond to that we work with girls a lot, and in fact, it's a strong rights-based approach. And the way to deal with the harm that we cause, the backlash, is to create a safety net alongside, so that there's a way to address that harm, but not to stop the empowerment, only to look at creating safety nets. So,
great. Thank you, Urvashi. Nora, last question from Nora.
Thanks very much. Nora Files, Ungai. I was really interested, Judith Ann, in terms of in your description of working with civil servants as another avenue for empowerment of girls, but also changing the approach of government to doing this work, from moving not just, yes, we agree with girls' education as an idea, but actually be stepping up and taking this on as their concern, working for girls, not just accepting this as part of their job. Can you tell us something more about what is most effective in that work? What's making a difference? And whether you're able to see any change, maybe 1 year or 6 years down the road, what's changing in terms of policy, strategy, plans? Thanks.
Okay, great. We have a lot of questions. All right, civil servants, that one's for you, Judith. What I'd like to ask the panelists to do is just pick one question to answer. And Judith Ann, we'll start with you. Perhaps you might want to answer Nora's question since it was directed to you. So we have the one about civil servants, what the change is making, Urvashi's question about how you're doing girls' rights education with employers, with parents, Ganga, patriarchal mindsets. It was all one big question, I think. Trauma-informed pedagogy, do no harm lens on empowerment, curriculum reform, gender anti-bias approaches, this idea of cultural change and sort of the limits of skills training, technical training if the labor market is not ready to, or not the labor market, it's the cultural bias is not ready to let women work. Roles of technology. So no, you can't all answer all of them. We don't have time. But Judith Ann, go ahead.
Good question, Nora. We've been doing this for a number of years, focusing exclusively on the civil servants. We try to build real commitment. We try to engineer a process where they become champions. And it's not a technical process. It's really sometimes at the commitment and emotional level. We connect with them. We don't have a one-off training. We have a series of trainings, and we don't do it as an NGO per se. We work with the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, which is a government think tank. So government interfaces with government, supported by a non-governmental organization, energized by a non-governmental organization, and it's not one-off. After the training, we have mentoring, and a lot of the training involves just taking government documents and just, you used the word, Ganga, demystifying them, just deconstructing them, gender analyzing those documents. And after a while, maybe not just one-off training, but after 1 or 2 sessions, they get it, they see it, they understand it, and they see the limitations of those documents. We've done a lot of analysis of champion and transformation leadership programs. And after 1 year, what we see is real change. We see sustainable and meaningful change. They're committed. They stand up to others who are not so persuaded. They energize, they put their own funds into girls' education programs. And at the policy level, they try to make a change and try to make a difference. Now, mind you, this is just the rank and file in the civil service. There is a gender unit, and they constitute a major problem for us because they feel they are the custodians of gender, but we try to incorporate them. We try to do, some of them are our master trainers, but it's a long process, time-consuming, a lot of diplomacy rather than technical work, but it works. And because we are players in the field for a very long time, we're able to see results, not after 6 months or just maybe 1 to 2 years we see the results, but it requires a lot of constant engagement. The UN agencies used to do this in the 60s and 70s. They've stopped. Nobody wants to go through that with civil servants. We all assume we can call them to GPE meetings and they will agree. No, they don't even get gender, but you really need to invest in long-term training.
Judith, and I can't help but resist a quick follow-up. What do you mean the gender unit is a major barrier for you? Well,
the ministry has a gender desk, and they have a gender unit, and it's peopled by women, and they are a problem. They are a big problem.
What exactly?
They do not believe gender should be mainstreamed. It's their thing.
Okay.
And, if you want a gender analysis done of a document, you go to them. But if you say that the rank and file in the ministry, the senior civil servants, the permanent secretaries should go through a gender training, they opposed us. We went directly to the minister and to the permanent secretary and said, we want to have an interaction on gender. We've done the gender analysis of the new ministerial policy on girls' education that goes up to 2019, and we want to give feedback. They blocked us. They actually physically blocked us. But we had to push our way through, sit with the minister, discuss it. He said, it's a done deal. The report is already written. The policy is done. But I take what you say on board, and I see all the people who worked with you to do this gender analysis, and they're serious people. They know education. So we'll take it on board. But to just get in the door, the gender unit, they physically blocked us. And they're hefty ladies.
Okay, Heather, follow that up.
All right. So I think Room to Read approaches our interventions with a do no harm as a principle. Child protection is a key core piece of how we approach our work. Our programming, we do global programming that's designed based on global evidence and global design, best practices. But then a very important piece of what we do next is contextualize it based on local norms, local traditions. Because what we know is if we're setting girls up to buck the system and to be self-advocates in a way that is disrespectful or a way that will cause backlash, we can do harm to those girls. And so our contextualization process is to try to understand what the acceptable norms are, what an acceptable way a girl can speak to her father, speak to her mother, speak to teachers, local community members, and figure out what support she needs to amplify her voice in a way that will be accepted and we can keep making progress, rather than in a way that will create a block. trauma-informed programming in our design, absolutely. We also look at what local issues girls are facing, if they're facing trafficking, gender-based violence rates, the early marriage issues, other things that girls are facing, what traumas can exist for them. We know Room to Read as an organization cannot address all of the needs, and we're not psychologists, we're not psychiatrists, but we try to identify other resources in the community, in the government, in nonprofits, in the area to try to link girls to other resources too, if they need them, based on what traumas they're talking about, what they're bringing to the table as well. But this is really tricky, and the social safety nets in many of the communities where we're working is simply not sufficient for the girls' needs. But we do absolutely, to the heart of our work, approach it with a do no harm and do as much good as we can.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ganga. What question would you like to
Did
answer?
we include the right best approach in our program? Partially, yes. We went to the Ministry of Education before we implemented the program, and we shared with them what we wanted to do. And the Ministry of Education issued a letter to the district education officers to facilitate in the implementation of the program. So the district education officers, and there is a gender focal person at the office.
Are they a major problem for you?
Usually women. No, it was very facilitating.
Excellent.
So they came to our program and they talked about those things. And then they also informed the parents how the government is facilitating for girls' education in the school system. So partially yes, but that's one of the areas that I have identified that we need more work when we scale up the program in the future.
Great. Thanks. Tasina.
Yes, basically I would say responding to our colleagues from Jordan and India. Yes, of course, what has been said that in regard to a do no harm policy and also looking at the issue of, a rights-based approach, these are very much embedded in the programs that we do. I have already mentioned that, the groundwork, the preparation that we need for launching our work is actually critical. So they're actually seeing or identifying that what are social norms, what are social barriers. We have very thorough risk assessments done before we actually launch any initiative to try to identify that, okay, from where actually the constraints might come up or what would be the hurdles and what are actually the best strategies to able to tackle these without actually disrupting, I would say, the social harmony. So that in one hand, but another area is that we also kind of feel responsible to introduce social change, that there are some issues which are just not right. And you don't just, I would say, accept that as it is and say that, okay, we don't want to rock the boat because, this is how it's been for thousands of years. No, we will rock the boat if it's for the best interest of, a girl to go forward. We will do that. But definitely taking into consideration or giving, I would say, all efforts so that there is a protective measure. And we have, I would say the parents, the community, they become part of the support system instead of, the problem. So that we try very thoroughly. And I think that, that economic empowerment, it works like a magic wand. It actually changes the power balance of that girl in the family, in the community, in society, and it really, I would say, becomes, I would say, it really helps to amplify her position, her voice in the community and the family. So allowing that economic empowerment to any girl, any youth, itself, I think, I would say, solves the problem a lot. But definitely, these are big challenges that I think, across the world, we face and we challenge. But I think that we have to also challenge these constraints.
I have one question that I'd like to pose to all of you, which was the technology question that was answered. I mean, when you think about empowerment, it's such a personal, human experience. How do you guys use technology in your work? Where is it? Back office? Is it front office? I'd be curious to hear. Does anybody have thoughts on?
Can I
They want to
start?
share? Yes, you may. Yeah.
So basically, yes, of course, in the office,
Yeah.
technology is very much part of life. But even in our programs, we've tried to introduce, I would say, technology, because Bangladesh is one of the countries where I think it's the use of cell phone is highest. We have these the mobile cash transfer, which I guess you all know about, but actually building on this system which is already there. So we use like these cell phones and tabs for different things. One is that we've actually introduced the demand survey in our programs using mobile cell phone apps. So that makes it much more efficient, much more, I think that it makes data much more clean, and it's much more cost effective. But then our challenge is that, there's the challenge of, I would say, illiteracy, that how do you use this technology when you have a population where half the adult population is actually semi-literate or illiterate. So creating apps which actually are usable to such kind of a population. So this is what we have done. The other thing that we've done is that trying to, because our program is actually spread all over the country, the monitoring mechanism is essential, that we actually set up a monitoring mechanism which actually reaches out to the grassroots, and it's strong enough to actually, I would say, maintain the quality as we go into scale.
Are you talking about monitoring of your program activities?
Monitoring
or
of the program, of the results. So there also we've actually developed apps together where we've actually given our staff tabs and actually trained them on how to use these. So we are now getting, for example, real-time data, which is actually helping us to make, I would say, much more better decisions to improve the program. Immediately we know what's going wrong in the remotest corner of our, of the country, and we can, step in and take actions accordingly. So technology has been very, very helpful. The third thing that we're trying to do is to create a kind of a LinkedIn for blue-collar jobs. So especially, which would benefit our graduates, so that that they can actually, I would say, promote themselves better as employees, but also employers would know, where to find a plumber or an electrician, when someone needs such kind of I would say, support. So these three areas we have actually launched activities, and we've taken the use of technology, and we found it very, very helpful, to become more efficient in our program.
Great. Does anybody else want to add in on the technology front?
Right now in our girls' education space, it's mainly back office, where we're using centralized databases to collate our data. We have longitudinal data on all of the girls that we've been working with over the years. Using those databases to mine the data to figure out what's working, what's not working. I think going forward, as we're trying to refine our engagement with our alumni, so girls who have graduated out of our programs, we see the power of social media, and we need to figure out how we can engage those girls through technology, through social media, to track what they're doing 1 year out, 5 years out, 10 years out, to see what sorts of life decisions they're taking and how their life skills are serving them. But in our curriculum itself, in our life skills training with girls, we're not currently using technology in that way.
Okay.
Well, all our civil servants who have been trained, they are all part of a WhatsApp group, and they share experiences of what they're doing. If they do something really great for girls' education, they flag it, it's out there, and they generate conversations around that. Engagement is not as high as we would like, but the ones who are really committed, they are the ones who remain engaged, and they drive the process and the conversations around initiatives on girls' education, particularly when it comes to skills and the new curriculum in particular, because that's a big thing now, the new curriculum that everyone's pushing because it's skills-based.
Interesting. Ganga, we have just a minute left. I wanted to leave the last word to you. What's a parting thought on girls' empowerment that you want to leave the audience before we go to our lunch?
I think both the Finance Education Commission report and Global Education Monitoring report, both of them, they warn us that if we keep doing what we have been doing, we are not going to get there. So we need more innovative approaches from different corners of the world. And that's what we have been doing in the developing world. So I appeal the donor community to take a risk in jumping in those innovative practices. And if we do that, I think we all can support and then get the results before it is too late.
Wonderful note.
That's all I
would.
would.
Thank you very much.